Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And thank you all for being here. We have hundreds and hundreds of you, I'm told, were registered for this. So clearly, this is a topic that a lot of people are, very interested in. So we hope to say some interesting things to you over the next 90 minutes or so. I see a few of you already are talking in the chat about where you're dialing in from. Please keep telling us, where you are, where you're tuning in from, and also as you hear things from our panelists, don't hesitate to, if you have any reflections or comments or thoughts or anything like that. We want to try and keep this a somewhat open conversation. And as we say, if you have specific questions for our panelists, we're going to have plenty of time at the end. So feel free to put those in the Q&A as well. So we've got three excellent panelists from three different countries, believe it or not, which is, I think, going to be a really interesting way for us to hear different perspectives. And I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, talk about who they are, where they are, and tell us a little bit about their jurisdictions. And so, Brenda, I'd like to start with you, please.
Great. Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Brenda Orchard. I'm the CAO for Lennox and Addington County in Ontario, Canada. That is sort of Eastern Ontario near Kingston. I'm also the CAMA First Vice President, so very proud of the work that CAMA does, as well as ICMA. One thing that I'd like to share with you that makes Ontario a little bit different in the municipal front, we have two-tiered level for municipal governance. So we have our lower tier, which delivers more of the traditional township kinds of services you would expect. And then at the county level that I'm at, we deliver some provincial services on a regional basis, such as we operate a nursing home, paramedic services, and deliver social services in our community, housing, homelessness, childcare, and social payments. So it makes us a little bit different in Ontario from the rest of the provinces in Canada to have this two-tier structure. For example, at my level, we don't have elections. I get the mayors and the deputies from our four lower tiers, form my council, nor do we collect taxes. The lower tier collects the taxes for us and distributes them to us. So it's a slightly different structure than in other places.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. And I'll turn to our next panelist, Alison.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. My name's Alison Mckenzie-Folan. I'm the Chief Executive at Wigan Council and also the place-based lead for health and care integration. So for those of you who have not heard of Wigan, we are the 9th largest metropolitan council in England. We're home to just over 330,000 residents, 14 towns, and located in Greater Manchester, so in the northwest of England. We've got about 5,500 staff, and as Brenda said, sort of delivering a range. So we're a Met Council, so we're delivering everything from social care to environmental services, housing benefits. So there's about 730 services that we're delivering. We're a really innovative council, sort of got a good reputation in terms of being very, very community focused and driven by innovation. And we're always looking to engage in partnership working for the benefit of our residents, our businesses, and our partners and our families and communities. Really an amazing new era within Wigan at the moment. We've developed with our partners on what's classed as Progress with Unity. So we've collectively signed up to 2 missions, a mission around addressing inequalities for our children, our families, and our residents and businesses. And then a second mission around making sure that all our towns and neighbourhoods have the opportunity to thrive. One of the big things about the council here is really working in line with our behaviours. So we have 4 behaviours: be positive, be accountable, be courageous, and be kind. And we try to live and breathe those every day as public servants. And I think probably the last thing to say, Chris, is that communications and how we communicate with our residents and with our communities, with our children and young people, both in person and online, is really, really important to us. So it's such an important area for us. So a lot of strategic thought and consideration goes into our approach, particularly to social media, and really sort of reflects the importance of how we communicate with our residents. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Alison. And our final panelist, Cara Roberson. Tell us about yourself.
Hi there, my name is Cara Roberson, and I'm the Strategic Communications Officer for the city of Wentzville, Missouri. Wentzville is a western suburb of St. Louis, and we sit approximately in the middle of the country. We are known as the crossroads of the nation, so we take that with pride, that we are pretty centrally located, which helps us bring in lots of different businesses and lots of different initiatives for our residents. We have 6 board members and a mayor. We are sitting right under 50,000 people right now, and we are continuing to be the fastest growing city in the state. Part of that means that we are constantly planning, constantly growing, and constantly paying attention to what that means not only for our residents, but for our business owners and for attracting new businesses and new residents to the community. We're consistently investing in infrastructure, enhancing our public services, and adapting to meet those evolving needs. Our board put in place about 2 years ago now some critical success factors that kind of govern and guide how we do what we do, what things that we put into our budget, different pieces over time that we feel are really important for our city and our community. So those include being a regional destination, prioritizing that infrastructure connectivity that I talked about, fostering economic vitality, and ensuring that we have a safe and welcoming community. And then on top of that, one of the things that we hold really near and dear is to deliver exceptional city services. We feel like as public servants, that is our ultimate goal. So we make sure that everything we do is for the residents. And that also comes into play with our communications, as we'll talk about today as well. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, and thank you again to all our panelists. As I'm sure everyone watching can tell, we've got some real powerhouses today who are going to tell us all about social media and civility and communications and how to do it well. I want to start with a first question for all 3 of our panelists. And Cara, I'm going to come to you first, since you got the last word on the last one. Give us a kind of broad sense, if you will, of your local government's social media strategy. What are some of the things that go into it? What kind of guides you? How do you do it over there?
Okay, so primarily our social media strategy is focused on not only just informing and educating our residents, but also making sure that they can come to us, that they trust us, that we're humanizing ourselves a little bit. This is something we've learned over time is really important. It's not something that we've always done, but it's something that we have prioritized and that now we do really well. We make sure that we are pushing information not only on social media, so I know we're talking a lot about that today, but we make sure those messages that we're carrying out on those social media channels are carried out everywhere. We have about 34 different ways that we communicate, which seems kind of crazy, but we've got to be able to talk to people where they are. And a lot of people are definitely in that social media environment. So we make sure that everything that we're doing is guided toward that, making sure that we keep our information really insightful, but also quick and easy to digest. People don't have time. We don't want to lose them as they're scrolling. So those are important things that we keep in mind as we're navigating the changing waters of social media.
That's great. And Alison, how about over there in Wigan?
I think similar to Cara, really. I mean, what we've tended to do really is see it as a proactive way of communicating with our residents. So trying to be innovative, trying to be creative, but also trying to be human-centered. And it's about how you are with the people in the communities as public servants. That that's why we're here, and so that's really, really important. I think in practical terms, what we have is a social media working group that I suppose provides the strategic direction for our channels, and we have a content and engagement manager who will do that. What we tend to do then is sort of tailor that content to the audience demographics, so keeping resident informed and driving some of that behaviour change aligned to what we're trying to do as a council and our broader ambitions. We use the range in terms of our strategy. We use everything we can use. So we're using Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Nextdoor. And we're also looking at how we sort of expand on WhatsApp and Blue Sky and Threads. But what we try to do really is take a measured approach. So sort of assessing new trends and channels. We don't just dive in on a whim. We sort of really think about what will prove beneficial both for residents and for the council in terms of that long run. I think one example is LinkedIn. Really, it's sort of really increasing in popularity in the United Kingdom, and it's become a real positive place for sharing the work with our residents and with our communities, and with businesses both locally, nationally, and probably internationally as well. And that's been really good in areas such as recruitment. You know, we've got really difficult recruitment areas to recruit our staff into. And then, but probably the last thing I'd say here is that certainly our strategy has changed, because we have changed our approach to X. It's evolved over the last 12 months, maybe as a reaction to some of the direction. So perhaps now we only focus on breaking news and emergency information there. And many, certainly in the United Kingdom, many, you know, sort of noting that many public authorities are stepping away from X. We still have a large following as a council on X, so you know, we think stepping away would leave a vacuum, but you know, for misinformation. So we're still using it for the key things, really. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the way I know that LinkedIn is getting more popular is that it was my birthday yesterday, and my dad sent me a message on LinkedIn wishing me a happy birthday. There are so many ways he could have got in touch with me, but he chose LinkedIn, and there's a moral to that story, and we'll figure out what that is. Brenda, tell me about what's going on up there in your Ontario county.
Well, like I'm sure everybody, we really value what social media can give us in terms of communicating with our residents and getting information out and building the trust in the community, and hopefully them seeing us as a reliable entity and boosting spirit and economic development and all the great things that can come from that. But we're also mindful that we have to strategically use the platform and have the right policies in place and the training for our counselors, and to make sure those protections are there, so that we can make the most of it, but protect ourselves. So with our staff, for example, our policy basically focuses on be transparent, be accurate, and be respectful. We ask them if they're posting on their own personal social media anything about the municipality, that they declare that they're an employee and that their views are theirs alone and not the organization's views, that sort of thing. And we absolutely have the policy that we do not corporately post on somebody else's social media. So we take some of those precautions, but certainly value what it can give us in terms of reaching our ratepayers, especially because we have a rural county. It's long and narrow, and it stretches from Lake Ontario from an hour and a half drive north. So it is a way to reach the various pockets within our large geographic area.
Oh, that's great. Well, one thing I did want to ask all of you again is about maybe some of the campaigns or some of the communications that you guys are proudest of on social media. If there's anything that you'd highlight as a best practice, dare I say, or something that you look back on and really think you did a good job with. And Alison, I'd love to start with you first.
Oh, thanks, Chris. If I may, I've got probably a couple of examples that we've been really proud of. So the first was called a campaign called Love Is Not Abuse. And this was actually really co-produced by the victims of domestic abuse to widen public awareness of what constitutes abuse, and I suppose highlight early warning signs to prevent any further abuse escalating. But it was really driven by the victims and their voices and what they thought was important. So the messages would really resonate with people who perhaps were suffering domestic abuse. So it was designed by them, but using the council's in-house and marketing design team. So it's a very sort of collaborative piece, and obviously quite a serious and sensitive piece of work. And the reason why we did this campaign is that unfortunately, particularly in our area here, we still have some significantly high rates of domestic abuse, and it was really important to us in terms of the number of residents who suffer domestic abuse. So it was a call to action, really, to promote one of our new domestic abuse services, which had been put in place. And what we saw through that particular campaign was a 72% increase in calls to the council's domestic abuse hotline. It won actually a national award for Campaign of the Year through the Local Government Chronicle here in the United Kingdom. So, you know, a sensitive and very serious issue, but actually driven by collaboration and co-produced with putting the victim's voice at the centre of it. And then perhaps another one to mention is what's classed as our Here For You campaign. And people will know that in England, many of our families and communities have been really struggling with the cost of living crisis. And we were aware that particularly our elderly community and our elderly residents perhaps were not claiming some of the benefits that they were entitled to because they didn't understand, or they were frightened, or they didn't have the information. So we used a lot of data and intelligence to drive through who we understood the cohorts of the population were. And then what we did was we used actually our social media platforms to raise awareness and do that targeted marketing to establish who was likely to be entitled to that extra support. And what that's done is driven £7 million worth of extra benefits into people's pockets that they were entitled to, but were frightened to come forward for, and were left unclaimed. And what we've done then is through social media is share stories. So it's been the elderly residents saying, you know, come along, it's okay if you have an appointment, the council will help you. You know, it's sort of raising awareness, and the videos that the elderly people have said, they've actually said it's been life-changing for them, it's been that impactful. And so the feedback we're getting at the moment is in various parts of our communities, residents are spreading the messages between themselves to say, you know, if you get a letter or you get a call, or just go in, have you seen the video where they're really, really helping people. So they're quite recent ones that come to mind, Chris, in terms of campaigns that I think have been you know, really impactful, and the way we try to do things with people and for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Cara, how about yourself?
First, I just want to say that I looked at the Love is Abuse campaign or Love is Not Abuse campaign, and it's amazing. So if any of you have a chance to check it out, I encourage you to do so. Very well done. I would say this kind of goes back to our last question a little bit, because what we do in terms of campaigns a lot of times is figure out what messages and conversations are happening online, maybe not in our space, but around our space, whether that's on some of our offshoot channels. So there's things like, we have a page called Wentzville 411, which is just like a community space that people are talking about on a regular basis, talking about all sorts of things. But there's content and dialogue that originates in those spaces that we're able to then turn into content that we can push out. So for instance, one of those that comes to mind is an anti-bullying campaign that we did with our police department. And that was kind of spurred off of conversations that were happening in that Wentzville 411 group, that things that were happening in the school districts and different things. So we were able to kind of put out a message from the city. We hear you. We're here for you. Here's how to kind of deal with this process. And not only did that allow us to connect with residents, it also allowed us to connect with the school district and with those parents that might have not been part of our audience necessarily, because our school district is not just within our city bounds. But then in addition to that, it allowed some other conversation and dialogue to take place. We had an actual in-person session that happened as part of that as an anti-bullying with some state legislators and different things. So I think it's kind of that listening into your community, not necessarily just in your space, but being aware of the conversations that are going on around you so that you can act and react to those as well. Kind of on the flip side of that, in terms of success, our success most recently has been with having fun. So this is something that we were resistant to for a long time. We were worried that it would make us look less professional, or we just couldn't do that because we were government, but it's really done the opposite. Like I mentioned before, it's kind of humanized us. It's allowed us to build trust. And from an analytics perspective, it's great. And that's not what it's all about. But for us, it's about getting in front of people, having fun, showing our human sides, putting information out in front of them when we need it, so that when things go wrong or there's a crisis or we need to get in front of them, they are already trusting our information, and also the algorithms are trusting our information. They're putting that information back out in front of people as well. So it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, it sounds it. And Brenda, how about yourself?
Well, in the spirit of what Cara was saying about having fun, ours is about hiring. So at our nursing home, you all know it's really hard to find nurses and personal support workers. It's I would say desperate to find them. And Our previous campaigns online would have the traditional corporate ads, maybe the bureaucratic looking ads. We took the fun approach and changed our ads to be more geared to the 20-year-olds that are graduating from community college with the PSW course. You know, umbrellas and beach scenes, have a job before the summer kinds of things, like really fun, geared to them ads. And we put out one each day, and all they had to do was DM and say they were interested, and somebody called them within an hour and had a conversation about their qualifications, booked the interview the next week, and they were handed an offer letter contingent on references before they left that interview. So compared to the old way we did it, we might have a post up for 5 days and maybe have 8 shares if we were lucky. And in the new way, we just in one day, we had 133 shares. And this new way, we hired 11 PSWs in a week. So, I mean, that's magic for us, if you can imagine. And in our organization, you have to have a certain complement of staff. And if you can't hire them, you have to use agency nursing. And agency nursing is pretty much double the cost. So big success for us. It's definitely something we're going to keep doing when we're going after that demographic.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to slightly shift gears ever so slightly and talk about the platforms that you use themselves. And I'm going to be cribbing quite significantly from a question submitted in the Q&A. So please, if you're out there and you have questions, submit them. I promise I'm reading them, and I will be asking our panelists them. Marilee Metcalf asked if you would mind, all of you, kind of listing the communications channels that you yourself use in social media. And I'd like to tack on a question about how do you kind of adapt your strategy towards those channels as those platforms evolve? You've mentioned X, you know, there's obviously these things are always in a bit of a state of flux. But how does it all work for you? And Brenda, I'd like to stay with you on that first question, on those questions.
Sure. Ours is primarily Facebook, Instagram. We don't use X. And our own website, of course, and staff intranet internally. That's our platforms.
And Alison as well, and maybe if you mentioned obviously the evolution with X as well, I'd love to just hear some more about how you've adapted your strategy with stuff like that.
I think, as Brenda said, we've definitely, our approach to X has completely changed over the last 12 months. Within England, and I know in other countries too, the reaction to the way the platform's gone has been quite intense. So, you know, many of the public authorities in the UK aren't using X. So we do still use it because we use it for breaking news and emergency information. So, you know, for example, we had a lot of floods over New Year, so we release it there primarily because we've still got significant numbers of followers, and people do take note of us in terms of being a public authority. So, you know, it's important that we're still using it because we're conscious that if we step away from it, there could be a vacuum, particularly with emergency information. But we use Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, X, LinkedIn, Nextdoor. We've started on Threads and Blue Sky, and we're using sort of WhatsApp in slightly different ways now for business work. But I think what we do really is assess the new trends and channels. You know, we've got a really great internal PR team, public relations team, and they all have their own specialisms, and they're really creative and innovative. So we let them really drive some of it in terms of their experience. And we've got a working group who really thinks about content engagement. So they use a lot of the demographics, audience work, you know, going out and talking to residents. So it's an ever-moving, you know, an ever-moving way that we're sort of using the various platforms. I think I did mention earlier, Chris, as well, that your dad had wished you happy birthday on LinkedIn. You probably get so many messages on LinkedIn, but it feels like the place where, you know, sort of spreading that real information and positivity, you know, is growing really. So yeah, that's the sort of way we're using it.
Right. Now, Cara, you mentioned you have 34 communications channels, and I mean, I'd be impressed if you could reel them all off.
Not all social media.
Yeah.
So for social media, we kind of stick to the norms with Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Nextdoor. We stopped using X. I actually pitched to stop using X in 2022, and we stopped using it officially January of 2023. We have a page. It is used for just as Alison was mentioning, for emergency communications. We have certain things that trigger use of X. So whether that's a boil advisory or something along those lines, then we will put things on X, because the media is still very much on X. So we want to be cognizant to that. We do have lots of ways that we engage with people. I don't have my sheet pulled up, but I'm happy to share that after the fact. We have newsletters, e-newsletters, the website, social media, postcards. We have TVs in our city hall lobbies and TVs in our rec centers. We have billboards and you name it. And we do feel like the more that we get in front of people in those different ways, the more that we get our message out. And especially when we're doing big campaigns like recruitment and things like that, we need to make sure we're hitting all those places. In terms of, you asked also about, I just want to touch on this real quick, but you asked about how we kind of switch our message. We do make sure that we are kind of following those, using those platforms as they were intended. So for Instagram, for instance, we only post pictures. Those pictures don't have text on them or graphics or anything of that nature, because that platform likes pictures and the people that are on there like pictures. And so we just try to make sure that we're playing to whatever the channel wants. Additionally, Alison mentioned Threads and Blue Sky. So I would say we are not on those, but if you are not on them, get your handle now. Just reserve your handle so that you have it, so that no one else can get it. And then just sit back and watch, see how it goes, or try a pilot program with something. That's kind of our approach to these new trends, just to kind of make sure they're working for other people like Alison before we jump on board with them.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we've talked about some of the positive stuff. We do have to talk about, unfortunately, some of the negativity and things that is associated with social media, since we're talking about civility and such on the platforms. How do you, in your kind of jurisdictions, there's kind of two big things for me. There's the trolling and the misinformation, and there's probably far more nuance to it than that. But how do you go about managing some of the so we say negative aspects of social media, and how do you approach it? And Brenda, I'd like to come to you first.
Yeah, it's a challenge. We do training for our counselors and staff, and the phrase we use is take the cue but don't take the bait. We're seeing a lot of negativity, say on a community page or something. We'll take the cue that maybe we need to do a better job of communicating this particular piece of information, or take a different angle or a different approach, or, oh, maybe that's something, yeah, we have to do better with this, and we'll take the cue. But we're not going to take the bait and start commenting on somebody else's site and getting into an unproductive back and forth, and then you get sucked in, and that's maybe what they want. So we're not going to take the bait and do that. So we'll have to say to counselors, don't take the bait, as well to staff. In terms of the trolling that happens on sites, our policy says that we will delete inappropriate content. And there are times when we have turned off comments on specific things, like, for example, former employee that was let go was making comments on job ad postings. And so you don't need comments on a job ad post, really. So we turn the comments off on things like that. Very particular about watching signs of stress in staff. If a particular department is getting picked on, or a particular individual is getting picked on, watching for those signs of stress. We do put safety plans in place if we have to in those certain circumstances. But our primary thing is take the cue, but don't take the bait.
That seems like a good strategy for just about all of us. Alison, how are you thinking about this in Wigan?
I'm definitely going to use Brenda's strap line, and I know we all share things, so thanks for that. I think similar to Brenda, really, and I'm sure Cara will be saying similar things. So we do have a policy that helps us navigate these difficult issues and how we manage some of it. So that policy helps us think around when we're going to delete comments, when to block someone, when to send a message publicly or directly regarding some of those standards. We use all the things that you'd expect us to use, like profanity filters, and we do report posts to platforms where we think it's appropriate. But yes, Chris, we do have increasing issues with spreading of misinformation on social media. And you know what? I saw a stat here. I don't know if people are into stats, but I saw it the other day, and I found it on my phone here. don't let it sort of skew our view of humanity. Just 3% of active users are toxic, but they generate 33% of online content. 1% of communities launch 74% of conflict online, and it's 0.1% of users that spread 80% of fake news. So a bit like Brenda, when I'm like, you've got a great strapline there, Brenda. It's remembering that at the back of your mind. But on a more serious note, people will know that in England, we had a really terrible situation after the stabbings of the young girls in Southport, which is actually my hometown, and the riots that followed across the whole of the country. And that was really around how much misinformation had spread and fear within communities and certain groups. And it led to the people like councils and the police trying to react and maintain, peace in the country, really, in terms of what was going on and the behaviour. So we worked closely in that period with the police, with our local councillors, to ensure that we were getting our messaging to be consistent and sensitive during that time. And so it's quite detrimental when we see some of the lack of regulation in things like X and what Facebook are proposing. And it's going to be a continuing problem for public authorities like ourselves. And I think Brenda's advice is probably right, that it's that fine balance, isn't it, about how you respond to that misinformation. And you don't want to get drawn in. You can wade in. You can draw more attention to situations when actually there's probably not that much attention on them. So, but we do correct things if there's false information, and especially where there's a sense it's going to create more concern, more fear, more issues around community tensions. And it is a really live debate at the moment, because we're seeing the increasing use of artificial intelligence and that deep fake information. And it's going to get more complex, the way we sort of deal with these issues. So yeah, while we manage the negative aspects, one of our behaviours is to be positive. So what we try and do is, in general, use sort of social media and all our channels to be a positive place for good, and get that, use them as a really important tool in our communication approach for being positive.
Yeah, great. And Cara, I'd like to give you the last word on this one. And I think you're probably in an interesting position as well, because here in the US, we have the First Amendment that we have to contend with as well, which makes life interesting, I'm sure.
It really is, especially on social media. So we really don't delete or hide any comments. We do not turn off comments on any post. We have some filters in place, but we've pretty much taken a lot of those off. Even our policy does address certain things. The only time I think we've hidden anything recently has been spam, which for some reason has blown up. We just keep getting, I've seen a lot of conversations around this in our government social media world, that there is lots of spam happening. So we do take care of that. But for the trolls, we tend to just ignore them as much as we possibly can, which is easier said than done. We kind of take an approach with staff and with our board when they get worried about these conversations that are happening. And I think Alison and Brenda may have both touched on this as well. But we take an approach that this is the loud minority. That's who you're hearing from. We do not believe that most of the time the conversations that are happening on our comment thread is really how the rest of the community feels. So just reminding people of that and thinking about that. Even if we hear from 100 people, sometimes when we hear from 2 or 3, we're trying to make decisions based on that. We just need to stop being reactive and try to be a bit more proactive in our approach. So we respond for 3 reasons. We respond to a direct question that's legitimate and clearly not rhetorical, as much as we can make sure of that. We correct any inaccuracies or misinformation, and we provide contact information, whether that's back to a staff person that can help them, their alderman, the mayor, or even just to like a website link or something like that. Other than that, that's it. I would love to have some more back and forth, and there are cities that do, but that allows us to kind of put some parameters on how we communicate. And we also push out information to our residents regularly about verified sources. So making sure that they are getting information from us or from other verified sources versus taking someone's word on these community pages and other things out there. That helps as well. The last thing I want to say is we have a Wentzville Communication Ambassadors Group, which is a group of stakeholders that's made up of business owners, HOA trustees, residents, and they help us be advocates for our city and our community online. And that helps because people don't want to hear from the city necessarily. They feel a little bit like we're Big Brother, I'm sure. So they take the word and trust the sources. And so we meet with that group quarterly and also give them information and ask them to be our advocates.
Yeah, that's great. Staying in a kind of similar topic, and I think you guys have already alluded to this, thinking particularly about your elected officials, your senior officials, who might be desperate to jump into something on social media, or they want to correct the record, or they want to do whatever it is that, say, an elected official does on social media. And how do you kind of navigate letting them kind of get on with it, with maybe training them appropriately, or, you know, making sure that they, you know, dare I say, act their age on social media? Cara, I'd like to come to you with this one first.
Sure, we do include this as part of their onboarding. So when a new board member comes on, usually in the spring, then we go through this process with them, kind of explaining. Again, it sort of works with them the best if we allow them to have these conversations in their own space to make sure that they are providing correct information. So the more that we can give them that's accurate and helpful, we will even put together posts and graphics and say, you can put these on your own page, you can share ours, which is what we prefer, but some of them don't want to do that. So I think it's arming them with the tools and resources to make sure that they have the information and that they are able to give that information. And then if they hear from constituents over and over about a particular thing, it works for us much like it does with those community groups. We will say, oh, this is an issue. And I'm sorry, I think Brenda mentioned this before, but this is an issue and we should put out some more communication about this. We should put this in a newsletter. We should put this in a social media post. So taking those clues and making sure that we're able to turn that into actual information is a great way to help our aldermen as well.
Alison, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we do work really closely with our elected officials, or our councillors, particularly around sort of promoting the work of the council. As Cara said, our newly elected members are giving guidance, they're giving training. We highlight that they're sort of switching from being a private citizen, in effect, to a public figure, and how that should then influence their use of the social media. So their training is quite deep, and hopefully it's effective. And, you know, we tell them about how they can use social media and what that can mean to them. I think one of the other things to say is that what we sort of talk about is sort of have, you know, them having sort of visible leadership on positive stories, or stories that are of interest to their communities and residents, and that's particularly important to them. So we have a cabinet style exec members here, so the sort of political leadership of the council. So in particular, they're given deeper social media training because they might be doing sort of broadcast, television, radio, you know, sort of that level of media work. So, you know, helping them sort of communicate effectively with their constituents, but also on, you know, sort of live channels as well. One of the things that we really need to be careful of, so our PR team and, you know, myself and the senior officers, we need to be careful that we're not sort of straying into any realms of political advice, because we're in restricted political posts. So there are really strict rules around the terms of officers not crossing the line into providing political advice or doing any political homework. So we have to be sort of very aware of that. There's a, you know, distinction between, you know, promoting the reputation of the council, but then being political. The politicians have their own sort of local party, you know, experienced people or officers and national officers to support them, particularly when it's the run up to elections or those sort of things. And we also have a pre-election period prior to elections. So none of our politicians then will be able to appear on any of the council channels or be quoted in communications. And that's really important. So I think we have our, you know, within the arrangement, we have an understanding of the respective roles of politicians and officers and rules that govern that. And we haven't had any particular issues in Wigan. We make sure that we stick to those rules and give people the training and let them get on with it, really. And that's sort of where we try to get to.
Absolutely. And Brenda, the last word on this to you.
Yeah, great. And we provide training to our counselors in orientation. It includes the take the cue, don't take the bait stuff. And we have a code of conduct. Municipalities in Ontario are required to have a code of conduct and an integrity commissioner. So the integrity commissioner is a third party. Typically for us, it's a lawyer, for example, who, if there's complaints about any disrespectful or inappropriate, anything against the code of conduct that a counselor might do or say, gets investigated by the integrity commissioner and reported back to council, and reports an open council session. And then council decides what the sanctions might be. For example, it could be docking a couple months' pay, or taking them off of committees, or they can't travel to go to conferences, or whatever the penalty might be. It's a very unpleasant public process. So part of our training includes what the code of conduct is, the importance of the code of conduct, and the repercussions for breaching the code of conduct. So that adds an extra reinforcement to the thought of being very careful on social media and not taking the bait, because that's a situation as a counselor you really want to avoid being in. But I know that's particular probably just to Ontario. I'm not sure if other provinces in Canada or other countries have that requirement.
Great, thank you. Before we move on, the chat has been blowing up, Cara, with lots of people wanting more information about your ambassador program. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk more about it. You know, how did it start? How does it work? What kind of advice would you have if someone wants to replicate it? Tell us more.
Sure. And I have some details that I can share as well that are a bit more formal than what I'm going to say right now. But essentially, we have a communication plan that went into place in 2019. And part of that plan was to create this stakeholder group. We have an internal and an external communication ambassadors team. So we started with the internal group first. So these are employees who communicate in some way or form or fashion in their jobs, whether that's in-person communication, or they're sending out communication, or maybe they're just putting door hangers or letters on people's mailboxes and that kind of thing. But that we are all getting together quarterly as employees to talk about the issues and things that we're having trouble communicating and how we can do a better job. It also helps me know what's going on that we might not see from my communications team that's out in the community. Again, it's kind of that same circle of we need to know what's going on so that we can do a better job of communicating it. And that's the whole purpose of all of these groups and ways that we interact. So then after we established the employee communication team, we broke that out into the community. We have a application process. Most of the people, I would say, are already they want to be involved. They want to give back. They want to help better the city. A lot of them have gone through our Citizens Police Academy, or like I mentioned, have been like homeowner association trustees and things of that nature. So they are involved community members, and they want to be more involved community members. So we have these quarterly meetings. We tell them all the things that are going on. We try to get feedback from them about how we might do a better job with XYZ. We try to keep them as informed as possible in between those meetings with emails and different things, especially if there's something either contentious or just informational that we need to get out there. So they will help us push that information out to not only their neighborhood groups, but also be our voice a little bit on those social media community platforms. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Great, thank you. And yeah, as Jeanette has said in the chat, we're going to be sharing various resources that people can click into and take a look for themselves. And who knows, maybe there'll be more of those ambassador programs all over the world. You know, Wentzville, the pioneers. Before we get into audience Q&A, which there are a lot of questions that we're going to get through, and it's some great questions in there as well. I wanted to ask a bit of a forward-looking question about artificial intelligence. You know, there are the good things that could happen with AI, whether that's scheduling out posts and finding you fun ways of saying different things, but there's also the bad stuff, you know, deep fakes and misinformation and that sort of thing. Alison, I want to start with you and ask, how do you view the kind of AI's role in social media? Are you nervous? Are you you know, intrigued by it, somewhere in the middle? What's your thinking on this kind of emerging technology?
I think as a council generally with artificial intelligence, both for our services and for social media, we're seeing it as an opportunity. So we want to be innovative. We want to explore, but we want to do that in a considered way. So yeah, we're chomping at the bit try things out, test things out. But what we are really conscious of is the ethical considerations, the public considerations, the risk considerations, that the impact on staff and the impact on our communities and residents. So, in particular, what we're doing in AI across the whole of the council is we've got a community who are using it more and more in their daytime jobs, whether that's in adult social care and also in our social media team. So we're sort of trial and testing it and gradually going with it to see where it can take us. So I think the general answer is that we're really, really positive about it, but we're not diving straight in and getting rid of all of our PR team and using AI to write our press releases. It does write some quite good press releases when you let it. So and it's the deeper you use it, you can see some pretty amazing stuff coming out of it. But we're using it to complement people's roles and help people in their jobs and test, but in considered ethical ways. So yeah, I think we're quite excited by it. But keeping strong about making sure that it's measured.
Brenda, how about yourselves?
I want to say similar. You want to be on the cutting edge, but not the bleeding edge of this. We're not looking to be on the frontier. We are planning to send staff for more training, so that we can get a sense of where it's going. It's evolving so quickly, it's hard to get your head around it almost in terms of some of the concerns that might be there. So I'd say excitement, interest, but going slowly.
And you, Cara?
Well, Wentzville likes to be early adopters. We like to embrace new technologies and jump in a little bit sometimes to a fault, but it's all worked out. So we started using AI across the city and not just in communications. And I will talk a little bit about that, but probably close to 2 years ago, which seems crazy to me, but we have done a lot of training with staff to make sure that they know how to use it ethically and responsibly. At first, we actually didn't have a policy in place that guided it. We used our ethics policy as a way to govern how employees were utilizing AI across the city. And then now we do have an actual AI policy. We look at it as I love what Alison said about complement. That's what we want it to do. We don't want it to replace anybody. It's not going to take anybody's job away. It's just a really great way to get some time back, to be honest with you. We utilize it for a lot of the smaller tasks and rewriting things. I think we can all agree that a lot of the things that we push out on social media, particularly and in newsletters and other communications, are things that we put out every year. So to be able to use something like AI to kind of freshen up some of that content and make it sound fun and exciting, as much as large item pickup for trash can be exciting, but it's really helpful, I think, in some of those ways for automating tasks and different things. So we're really excited and have loved what it's done for us as an organization.
Absolutely. So look, we've got about 40 minutes left on this webinar. And I'm going to start dipping in and out of audience Q&A to keep you guys on your toes and to answer some of the questions that are out there in Cyberland. And May Wilson has asked a belting question, which I definitely want to ask all of you now. May asked, social media is a key tool for public engagement, but digital exclusion still remains a challenge. How, in your opinions, can councils strategically use social media to reach and support digitally excluded residents while ensuring accessibility and inclusion? It's a brilliant question. And Brenda, I'd like to come to you first.
In Ontario, we have accessibility requirements that we have to adhere to for our website, for example, for giving out information. So it has to, that's certain font size, certain colors, certain for things from the visual perspective. So we have accessibility requirements we have to maintain. Our big challenge is rural connectivity. There are pockets of our county that they don't have access digitally. So we use our libraries to disseminate information that we've posted online, like duplicating those posts on posters and sort of things like that. It's a challenge for us in rural areas, absolutely, for the connectivity, and also for seniors that perhaps might not be as literate with the computer as others might be.
Absolutely. And Cara?
I think this kind of goes back to what we talked about before, those 34 different ways that we communicate. While we are aware of this being an issue on social media and do try really hard to make sure that that is on our radar and that we're being as accessible as possible. And like she mentioned about ADA, that's something that we have to, there are rules and things that are happening where we're going to have to do a lot more with that than we are. We try to be very cognizant of font color and things like that, backgrounds and things like that. But just making sure that that's not your only source for information, I think is the best advice I can give. We do also look to places like senior centers and libraries as other ways to push out that information as well.
And Alison, how about yourself?
Similar to Brenda and Cara, really. I mean, we have got sort of accessibility standards that we adhere to, and we monitor those and test ourselves and make sure we're doing those. We use multiple channels, so everything's not through social media. So even though austerity hit the UK and we had to take £180 million out of our budgets, we weren't a council that closed any of our libraries. So we've got 14 libraries, 7 Be Well centres. We've got a range of family hubs as well. So we've got both sort of telephone advice, face-to-face advice, and our community centres where we do all of that sort of engagement for people who perhaps aren't using social media. And then in terms of digital inclusion, lots of volunteer programs. So we have a Tech Mates program where we've got about 80 to 100 volunteers who help people who are less confident on social media. So they may do Tech Mates afternoon sessions where they all get together. It may be one-to-one sessions. So that's about increasing people's confidence and helping them. And it's all age ranges, people, and from all demographics in our communities. And then in addition to that, we do things like tablet lending libraries, people can get SIM cards and get the data. We can do data, giving people free data. So there's lots of sort of innovative ways that we try and support people, because digital inclusion and digital confidence is a real issue for some parts of our communities. So trying to make sure that we support everybody in the best ways that we can.
Right. Another one. This is for our smaller cities and other jurisdictions that are maybe a little bit smaller than the rest. What are your recommendations for communications for those small places that don't have teams to kind of perhaps do as much work? What advice would you have? And Brenda, I want to start with you on that one.
In our area with our lower tier municipalities, there's some that are more urban than, there's 2 that are urban, 2 that are rural. We offer our staff and share our staff when they need us for communications work and for sharing of getting information out and that sort of thing, because our 2 smallest are very small and don't have those kinds of resources. So we share resources readily with them. And that's our basic strategy.
And Cara?
So when I started in this position, as I mentioned, Wentzville is growing, so we weren't as large as we are today. I was part-time, and now there are 3 of us that do this full-time, but I can speak to this small city mentality. We tried to utilize every bit of everybody else that we could. So that employee communication ambassador team was really amazing to me as a one-person department at that time, to be able to rely on them to help me craft messages and get messages out there and find new tools and things like that. I think it's about figuring out what works, what your community needs, and maybe with those one-person teams, surveys and things like that are the best place to start, because you can really drill down to what your community wants and needs from you and prioritize based on that.
Alison?
I think the local government family in England and the United Kingdom's a bit like Brenda said. We often share and support each other. So if it's helping each other out, sharing resources, or just learning from each other. So there's a lot of sort of that learning and promoting and supporting each other. And then using staff as ambassadors. So often staff, I think about 87% of our staff live in our borough, so they are the ambassadors for the place. It's their communities, it's their families. So thinking about how we use our staff as ambassadors, and then also using the community themselves, because often the assets are within our communities themselves, aren't they? So, you know, maybe the key focal points in our communities who might be running Facebook groups or other social media platforms, and often they can be, you know, part of that ecosystem of communications. If you set up those good relationships and you have that trust with some of the community ambassadors, they can often be the sort of bridge between some of this and you know, be supportive to some of the council messaging and what you're trying to achieve. So I suppose different approaches, really.
Yeah, totally. And Alison, I'd like to stay with you. There was a question for you in the Q&A from Florencia. She said, can you speak more about the social media work group you mentioned? Is it community volunteers or an internal group? Like, just tell us a little bit more about what happens there.
Was that the internal one? Was it I mentioned? It wasn't the tech mates, was it? It was the internal group.
Yeah,
so that's really made up of our you know, quite a few members of staff from our our PR team, so our public relations team. So we have people who might be specialists in marketing, or they might be videographers, or they might be doing a range of different roles in there. But within that, we have like a working group who will become more responsible for for our social media and all of our platforms. But they then work with the rest of the organisation. So we have directorates, so whether it's in adults or children's or environment, so they will pull in you know, sort of topic experts or people to help if we're doing some sort of campaigns and things. So it depends on the particular topic. So there's a core group of people within the public relations team, and then that widens if we're trying to do you know, particular campaign work or you know, or different pieces of work. So and we also then have a content and engagement manager who sort of tries to I suppose provide that leadership really and that strategic direction to the team. So it flexes really around the organisation and what we're trying to do.
That's great. Another question in the Q&A bar. Keep them coming in. We've still got about 30 minutes left in this webinar, so keep throwing them at us, and I'll keep throwing them at our panelists. Brian Leddy asks, how do you stay compliant with public records laws when using social media? We're going to talk about the Freedom of Information Act and equivalent legislation. Cara, how do you stay on top of FOIA?
So we use Archive Social to archive all of our content from all of our pages, which includes comments and sometimes stories and posts and all of that good stuff, so that we can pull any of that at any given moment. It allows us to not have to really think about it. It is not a cheap expense, but it is something that we can just have running in the back and in the background and not have to worry about until we need it.
Brenda, any other thoughts on that?
No, the same thing. We just archive our content.
And Alison, I suppose I should.
Yes. I'm not quite sure which technical application we're using, but I know that we obviously we get inundated with freedom of information requests, probably like everybody else. But yeah, I think you know, we use archive and systems to make sure that we're staying compliant.
Absolutely. Well, I want to ask a broad question just to kind of get us all thinking a little bit. What kind of, if there's one thing that you would want our attendees to take away from today's conversation, if there's any kind of major things that you want to make sure that they kind of have stuck in their brains, what would you want them to remember about whether it's your use of social media or anything else? And Alison, I want to start with you on that one.
Did you say one, Chris, or I'll have more than one?
You can have as many as you want. Time is on our side.
Cara and Brenda will do it between us, I'm sure somehow. So it probably goes back to what some of Cara and Brenda said, really, is that, hey, listen, you know, we live in quite a complex world, don't we? But let's not be put off by negativity and incivility and you know, that approach. So we know the loudest voices often get the most attention on social media, and those algorithms, I don't know how they're feeding your daily life, but you know, they can promote conflict and they can promote controversy and some quite unsavory stuff. So my motto and our motto as a council is to be positive and be kind and be courageous and be accountable. So we stick to those values. And I think, you know, the the only thing for evil to triumph is if good people do nothing. So if Cara's team and Brenda's team and my team, we sit there and do nothing, then, you know, it will carry on. So staying true to the values. We're public servants, so promoting kindness and positivity. And it's about pride, isn't it, in our places, in our communities and our people. So it's really displaying those values. So my advice, or the things that I do, is that we treat people kindly, we cut through negativity, we stick on message and be positive, but we also show that we care, that we have empathy, that we're incredibly proud of our borough, but we face into and we hold our hands up when we've done things wrong, and we're accountable and we act and we respond accordingly. You know, and that's really important, isn't it? I think it was Brenda or perhaps Cara had said, you know, that we do listen. I think part of our 6 ways of working is that we see the person and we listen deeply, and by listening deeply, you get the chance to respond. So for me, you know, even though we've got lots and lots of community facilities in our borough, we've still got all of our libraries and other community assets. The way people come together in the world these days has reduced. So, you know, less people going to faith or churches, less people going to the local shops, or, you know, food and beverages, or going to the pub, as we would call it in England. So social media does provide a sense of community and a sense of place for people. So we have to take part in it. We can't step away. We have to play our part, but play it in a real positive and, you know, sort of courageous way to be accountable as public authorities. So that's sort of where I'm at in life in terms of it. I mean, just very personally, if you don't mind me sharing something personally, you know, I used to live my life on X many years ago. I'd be posting stuff on it every day. I'd be like, I'm wanting to promote stuff. I try not to go on it personally as much anymore for all the reasons we've described. But using LinkedIn, and actually it's about listening to people and engaging and responding. So I do respond personally to people. I do respond on LinkedIn, and I think it's using that as that communication and two-way tool to be accountable and make sure that we can respond and be public servants.
Brenda, how about yourself?
Well, I'd say social media, it is wonderful, and it is our communication tool. It's a spirit building tool. It's fantastic, but I also think we have to be mindful of when incivility transitions into harassment. And I, for one, have had a staff person go through this, a horrible situation, and we have to look for signs of stress in our staff. And people might want to be stoic and say, no, I'm fine, but you can see the signs of stress in a person if the incivility has transpired into harassment. And there's a whole bigger story there, but I'll stop at that. It's just, as leaders, I mean, let's embrace all the positives, but really look out for the health of our staff if they're faced with incivility.
And Cara?
I would agree with both of Brenda and Alison's takes on this. Just a couple more things. Kind of echoing a little bit of what Alison said, to embrace your role as a public servant. Sometimes that's hard, and sometimes that's hard because of incivility. Sometimes that's hard because we're doing 10 other things and this is not our entire life. But our work is about building trust, and our work is about informing and engaging our community. So I think if that's our focus almost all the time, we build those relationships, we make those connections, and continue to evolve with the needs of your community, then I think we're all going to do a great job. The other thing I would say, just as a kind of a throwing out there for ICMA and 3CMA, be part of these groups and be connected to these groups and the people that are in them, whether that's to get great ideas like we've shared here today or to vent. These people they get it, they understand what you're going through, and those are going to be your biggest champions as you move through things, or if you face challenges and things along the way.
Absolutely. Well, we've still got 25 minutes, but that was a nice one to keep the ball rolling. We've got another question in from someone who's anonymous, but it's a great question. I'm going to ask it anyway. What kind of engagement do you have with the under 18 and 18 to 25 demographic? Do you feel like use of social media is could change young people's perception of local government? If so, do you have any examples of campaigns that have been effective with this? Alison, why don't you kick us off with this one?
Wow, Chris, I need to think that through off the top of my head. I knew this would happen. You always get one where you're thinking, wow. I think the one thing I would mention is that we have a youth cabinet system. So we have amazing young people who are part of our youth cabinet. So they get voted in by the young people across all of the schools, and they form a youth cabinet for people under 18. And what we do then is use that youth cabinet to be sort of, you know, an amazing sort of way that we sort of understand where some of our young people are coming from. So youth voice, children's voices in everything that we do. In terms of social media, I think understanding some of those demographics have been helpful for us. So I think the drive to some perhaps of the channels that we've been using on you know, Instagram perhaps differently, it's more of a place shaping social media platform, but certainly TikTok and some of the YouTube videos that we've been doing have been much more for a younger audience. So yeah, we sort of we are trying to use it in lots of different ways through YouTube and TikTok, but also using Youth Cabinet to help and shape some of that, because they're taking that sort of responsibility, as they've been voted in by about 30,000 of our young people in our schools to be the voice and representative of the young people in our communities. So that's really helpful to use those as a sort of a alert, you know, to use that group of people who are amazing to help us.
Yeah, totally. And Brenda, how about yourself?
I love that youth cabinet idea. For us, it's primarily through our libraries and our library exposure on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And I guess the 20-year-old something, I'd use the example I did with our job ad search, like just trying to structure what we're putting out there. It's more fresh and inviting and less, I'll say, bureaucratic looking.
Yeah, and Cara?
Yeah, this is a hard audience to reach. Our Parks Department does a really good job, I think, because they're trying to hire for that group, and we hire as young as 15, so they're pretty good at trying to connect with that group. They also use Discord to connect with that group. I can't really speak to that because I don't know much about it, but I know that that's a way that they are engaging on a different platform than we usually are. Instagram, and particularly Reels, has been where we have connected best with that audience. We don't use TikTok, but I imagine it probably might even do better, but we use Reels, and just having fun is what's part of that, connecting with that demographic. So make sure that you're doing that, and it doesn't look as bureaucratic as Brenda mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a couple of questions about say resident-led groups and these sorts of things. Maybe that's on Facebook, maybe that's on Nextdoor and that sort of thing. Particularly Matt in Middletown, Rhode Island, says there's a pretty active residents page run by a local on Facebook, which I'm sure is interesting. It can be a very helpful way to get out information, but it's also a fount of misinformation and negativity, Matt says. How involved do you get with an off-site social media channel not managed by your organization? Cara, I assume everything's fine in Wentzville and no problems at all.
Yeah, don't go to Wentzville 411 and you'll be fine. That is our community page. It is rampant with misinformation and redundant questions and questions that people could Google and get the answer to in way less time than putting up a post, but still they do. So we do not ever comment on there as the city. We do use that information again to potentially build up our communication. So if we see a content that keeps coming up on those pages, then we will do some type of social media post around that. We've even gone so far as to say specifically, you might have seen this on Wentzville 411, but here's the real story. So I think that's gone over really well to kind of bring people back to us as the trusted source of information. We also use those communication ambassadors and rely on them to help us kind of manage content and comments and things in there in terms of pushing out information. We do, employees will from time to time jump on there, mostly to just correct inaccurate things, but in general we just try to watch it. I think it's more about being aware of what's happening so that you can control it if something needs to happen, or that you can make your board and council aware of those things as well.
Absolutely. And Brenda?
Exactly. Take the cue, don't take the bait. We will say, okay, we need to obviously ramp up our communications on this, and we'll do that part, but we do not post on others' Facebook sites. I think that's what they want, and we're not taking the bait.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alison, anything more to add on this?
Nothing really more to add, just that you could spend your life doing it, couldn't you? Because there's that many different Facebook pages and different groups. They're not all negative, so we have quite a few who are really, really supportive, and we can talk to the admin, the admin owners of those groups, and they're really supportive. But as Cara and Brenda said, yeah, keep an eye on it, get our own stuff out there, never respond, never get involved, never go there. So and just it's that constant monitoring really by the team and making sure that we're really up to date and using our intelligence.
Absolutely. Merrily is in the running for being one of my favorite attendees because she's asked another really good question, which is, are there any training, conferences or network opportunities you recommend for communicators? And I'm conscious that we have, probably loads of different countries and different jurisdictions on the line, but from your perspectives, are there places that you would recommend going, even if that's somewhere online where you feel like you've learned a lot? Alison, I want to stay with you first.
We have the Chartered Institute of Public Relations in the UK, and then loads of other spin-off organisations. So many of those run lots of social media training. There's things at a local level. I think some of it is self-learning as well, isn't it? Pick up a good book. You can do a lot of that sort of self-learning. Listen to podcasts. I've listened to podcasts in the past. Go to where you think the experts are, or people who can give you great advice. So within England, I suppose the Chartered Institute are sort of the go-to people, but there are lots of other organisations. And then we have communication specialists who have their own sort of network and learning groups. So we had a national conference here a month or two back. We managed to get them all to come to the Northwest. Often it's in London, in England, but we got them up to the Northwest, and everybody comes together there, and they, obviously social media is a big element of the conference where people do a lot of learning and workshops. So a whole host of different sort of toolkits that people can use, and something that you can get involved in.
Brenda, how about Canada and maybe more broadly on this side of the ocean?
Right. CAMA has an incivility toolkit that we've recently done. I would say, like Alison, would look for other resources to bring in. But one of the things that we do in our organization, we have all of our leadership team, anybody who manages somebody, CAO right down to a supervisor or a foreman. We bring them together, everybody together, to do training 3 times a year on leadership topics. So we've done training on incivility, how to have difficult conversations, those sorts of things. So we'll parachute somebody in to train us all together so that we can change our culture and make consistent application of things across our organization. So we've done that with this topic as well.
Cara?
So I would say the number one resource for me is the City County Communication and Marketing Association. They have lots of great resources for webinars and a conference that will be happening later this year in Las Vegas. They have a great group that knows what they're doing, and leaders that are ready to step in and help you at any given time. But their tools and toolkit and webinars and all of that are great. I would say also ICMA has done a great job of increasing communication and social media content at its events. I actually spoke on a very similar topic to this at ICMA last year, and I'm speaking this fall about a different topic, but there are always kind of things in there that you can get in and really learn and grow from as well.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're a little bit ahead of time here, but I think we have probably come to a good stopping point here. I want to thank again our 3 panelists, Brenda, Cara, Alison. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our attendees for joining us too. We will post all kinds of resources and other things on the site afterwards, and a recording of this I think will be available as well. But from myself and from everybody else who's been doing this, thank you again so much, and have a great rest of your day.